In the myth of the Minotaur, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with, Theseus, the son of the king of Athens, was sent to Greece as a part of the tribute that they had to pay to Crete, to the king of Crete. And on the island of Crete was a labyrinth. A labyrinth, again, as all of you know, is a very complex maze from which it's virtually impossible to escape. And in this labyrinth was the Minotaur, the half man and half beast animal that would represent the lower part of man's nature, that which pulls him back into death, delusion, darkness. The labyrinth represents the mind and its complexity, the nature of the delusions of the mind. And the story goes that Theseus became friends with Ariadne, the daughter of the king of Crete, who wanted to help him. And so she gave him a spool of thread, which he unraveled as he entered the labyrinth. And because he was a very strong and stalwart warrior, he was able to slay the Minotaur. To slay his lower passions is the symbolism of this. Even at that, it wouldn't be easy to get out. But because he had that slender thread, he was able to follow it past all the various dead ends out into the light of day. This is all a very profound and beautiful myth, but also symbol, allegory of our nature as human beings and the predicament that we find ourselves in. Why delusion? Why do we speak of delusion as delusion? Our senses tell us that it's a perfectly real world we live in. And yet science has pretty well exploded that by pointing out to us that our senses are able to perceive only a very small part of the total spectrum of what is even visible or audible. We can't hear beyond, say, 20,000 vibrations a second, whereas even dogs can hear whistles that we can't hear. There are sounds that go far above and far below our capacity to hear. Colors, vibrations of light that are far beyond anything that we can see. Our senses tell us that this chair that we're sitting on, or this floor that you're sitting on, is solid, but it's not so at all. In fact, it's a very interesting thing that the space relative to the space between the stars is comparable in the body. That if you go to the nearest star, it takes light at the speed of 186,000 miles a second, 4 years to get here. 4 years. Just imagine how far away that star is. And comparable is the space in our own bodies between the atomic particles. They're infinitely far apart. Then why, sitting on this floor, don't you just sort of sink through it? Simply because of the vibrations being different. There's a different kind of electromagnetism in your body and in the floor. And even pushing your hands together, there's a cohesive power in the hands that, though similar, won't go through. But the so-called miracles of saints that enable them to walk on water, to pass through walls, to do things that are impossible according to our normal frame of reference, are possible only because reality isn't the way it seems to be. In fact, even scientists have begun to realize that this world is rather more like a dream than anything else. Or you could put it as being very much like a movie. That a movie now, what a step upwards in reality it was when they were able to get away from the Keystone Cops movies into sound movies, talkies as they called them, and slow it down to a level of speed where they weren't just going like this all the time, and then be able to introduce music, be able to introduce speech, be able to introduce it finally to such a level of sophistication that it really sounds like the human voice and not like a pen scratching across a page. And Yet, this is only two of our senses. What if you could get smellies? You get out into a field and you see the grass blowing and you see the flowers and you see their beautiful color and you hear the wind blowing over the grass, and the next thing you know, you're actually smelling those flowers and smelling the grass. How much more real would it be? Supposing we went a step further and got feelies. Supposing you could, in fact, they've been able to do this, to stimulate centers in the brain that give you the illusion that you're actually feeling something, and yet you're not at all. It's that center in the brain that's stimulated when you think that you're feeling something, but you're not really feeling it there, you're not there. It's an electrical impulse that's passed back to the brain from the sensory surface of your body, the nerves, through the nerves, to the brain, which then still hasn't reached you. Then it has to be interpreted. And you have to say whether it's a pleasant feeling or an unpleasant feeling, and how, well, for example, in fraternity initiations, one of the classic ways of frightening the young initiate is to put a piece of ice against his skin when he's blindfolded and tell him that he's being branded, that all members of this fraternity have to be branded to show that they're a part of this. And in many cases, they scream with pain, and yet it's only ice. They tell themselves that this is so because this is the message that they're interpreting through a sort of scrambling of signals. You can use this in a good way, too, that when there's something painful, you just tell yourself it isn't painful. And you'd be amazed at the extent to which you can actually absorb it. Or say, all right, it's painful, but so what is pain? Don't define it as something you shouldn't be experiencing. And we add to whatever experiences we have our ideas about the experience, and those ideas are at least as real to us as the experiences themselves. A friend of mine was a doctor in a clinic in South Africa where there were many people. It was sort of out in the, whatever they call it, the veldt, is it, or something? Anyway, many of the Zulus there would get drunk on Saturday nights and get into barroom brawls. And he said that it not infrequently happened that somebody would come into his clinic late Saturday night with his stomach, his intestine, his abdomen all slit open, holding his intestines in his hands. Looking at this, he practically faints. And these people say to him, "Don't bother to give me anesthesia, doc, just shove it in and sew it up." He said a woman came in recently with half her breast severed, and she was just holding it there. She said, "Don't worry about it, doc, just sew it up, doesn't matter." Yet you'd think, well, after all, these people don't have any sensibility. We are refined, we are civilized, and we feel these things which they don't feel. Well, if there's any difference on a sensory level between primitive people and civilized people, it's the primitive people are a great deal more sensorially aware than we are. An African bushman, aborigine, can see something minutes before anybody else can on the horizon. They see better, they hear better, presumably they feel better. They have to be able to respond instantly to the kinds of challenges that they get in a primitive way of life. In the jungle, let's say, where if they don't respond instantly, a snake might get them. They're much more aware than we are. Then why aren't they more sensitive? Because they haven't built up that thought in their minds that this shouldn't be. We live in society where all the uncomfortable things are, in a sense, shut behind closed doors. Somebody goes crazy and we put him in a mental institution, and somebody gets cancer and we put him in a hospital, and we don't see these things, and we're so adjusted to, as soon as it gets a little cold, turn on the heat. As soon as it gets a little hot, turn on the air conditioner. As soon as we're a bit cold, put on gloves. We're so accustomed to protecting ourselves from all the various stimuli that our culture in America is even exaggerated. I remember how I used to feel when I lived in Scarsdale, New York. It seemed an offense to me that every unpleasant aspect of life was hidden behind high hedges. It's not that I wanted to look at the unpleasant aspects, but it seemed like such a conscious, deliberate, exaggerated effort to pretend that the world's a lot prettier than it really is. And whereas I don't want to feed on all the ugliness, at the same time I don't want to pretend either. Man goes around pretending a great deal. And what I noticed with the consciousness in Scarsdale was that I never heard the word beautiful. It was always pretty. There didn't seem to be any extremes. An interesting thing that I've observed in Italy and Switzerland is that in Switzerland, everything is sort of kept at a sort of an average level of beauty. In fact, of course, it's an absolutely stunningly beautiful country, but the people in Switzerland have sort of a wish to make everything look average, ordinary, common sense, down to earth, normal, you know. You get to Italy and you find much more exaggeration of beauty and tragedy. But if you look over history, where has the great work come from? Virtually nothing from Switzerland and a great deal from Italy. The ability to be aware of reality, to face it as it is and not to try to sort of round it all out. This is, I think, an important part, to be able to face things as they are. In Italy, they tend to exaggerate. I've often laughed at how I used to think that Puccini's operas were exaggerated, but when I went to Rome, I found they, if anything, were understated. Because there was everybody who came to me, oh, some great tragedy was happening. And yet to be able to look at life as it is, and then not to be touched by it. I'm not going to bother to put this contradiction together, the contradiction between not being touched by it and therefore not being able to create great things. That is a contradiction, but it's not really. The issue here is that we be able to remove ourselves from our delusions. And mankind surrounds himself with delusions, surrounds himself with self-created delusions built onto a sort of substructure of delusions that are handed to us from birth. The fact that we can't see beyond a certain spectrum, the fact that we can't hear beyond a certain spectrum, the fact that the body tells us that we are something limited, heavy, something that gets tired, something that needs to be fed. These are things that we can't just wish away. They are our illusions or our delusions. And we add to them our likes and dislikes of these things. We respond to them in ways that make it seem good or bad, very painful or not painful, and so on. How to get out of these delusions is the human challenge. We are in the labyrinth. And if we don't deal with it in the right way, then we're going to find that the Minotaur, our lower nature, catches us. And many things, many roads, many passages that we try to go down, thinking that this is the way out, actually end in a dead end. And then what do we do about it? People go for all their lives baying down some false trail. And when they wake up, it's too late to do anything about it. They've just got to try again their next lifetime. I'm thinking of my father in this case. How I would try for years to try to interest him in spiritual teachings, and he just wouldn't buy it at all. I said, people aren't happy. He said, nonsense, I'm perfectly happy. And yet, living in that particular way as his life ended, it was sad. Almost the more sad in a way because he kept all his intelligence. He was completely aware. But his senses, one by one, shut down. He couldn't feel, he couldn't taste, he couldn't see, he couldn't hear. And if he fell down, he couldn't get up. He'd have to lie there and wait till somebody came. Sometimes a neighbor would happen to find him. And it's really pathetic. And he was a man of extraordinary courage. But in his last year, I found him crying a great deal, just out of the sheer feeling of helplessness. because that was his reality, and his reality was being taken away from him, and he didn't have a substitute. He wasn't afraid of death, but to live in that way was to him just appalling, and it was appalling to us to see him have to go through it. He had built a fairly solid structure around his life, a solid structure of delusion. It worked for him pretty well most of the time. For many people, it doesn't work very long at all. They think that they're going to become happy because they're famous. Ian Fleming was, his comment on fame was that it was fun for a while, but now it's just ashes, old boy, just ashes. And it is, of course. You get too famous, and you can't go anywhere without people pointing you out. You can't have a moment of peace without feeling that everybody's staring at you. I had this funny experience in did I tell you the story? I did just the other day, didn't I, in Vancouver?
Just a few of us.
A few of you. Okay, I'll tell it now again then. I was in Vancouver a few years ago, and there was this big conference, and at least 1,000 people were there, and I was one of several speakers. Well, after that conference, I went to Vancouver Island, to the city of Victoria. And a number of people who had been at the conference were there for vacation before they went home too. And they'd see me in a restaurant or in a shop or whatever, and I'd see them looking at me like this, and then they'd finally come over and say, "Well, aren't you Swami Kriyananda?" And I said, "Yes, in fact." And I felt sort of like a goldfish in a bowl. I just couldn't get away. And the funniest experience happened at the end. I was just going into a shop to get something on my way out of Victoria, and there was this lady looking at me like this, and I thought, "Oh God, here it comes again." And she came up and she said, "Aren't you the director of the Winnipeg Ballet?" But there isn't anything in this world which finally gives man what he wants. Sooner or later it turns to just ashes, old boy. You don't find happiness in these things. And so, built up on the superstructure of a world that in fact is somewhat geared to confuse us. It's not very fair of God, but when you're playing a game of tennis, you don't worry about whether you like or don't like the way the other person plays. You worry much more about how you can get the ball back to him. And so here we are stuck. There's no point in complaining about it. The issue is more, what do we do about it? And the thing is that most of us are a great deal more into protecting our delusions than getting out of them. We'll build all kinds of fancies and fantasies to defend our stance. We should be interested in truth, but instead we're much more interested in persuading everybody how right we are. We can pretty well assume that we're not right about most things. This is a fairly safe assumption, but it's not an assumption most people make. We were talking the other day about how a very interesting psychological experiment has been made repeatedly of two lines on a board. The top one is longer than the bottom one. And groups of 5 students are selected. 4 of them are told to say that the bottom line is longer than the top line. It isn't longer, it's shorter. But they're told to say that it's shorter. In 80% of the cases that have been tried, the 5th person says the bottom line is shorter. Longer. What am I saying? Longer. Longer. In 80% of the cases. It's incredible. But the further incredible thing is that when they're told that what the nature of the experiment was, and that 4 of them were told to say that it's shorter, a vast number of these people insist that it actually is longer. They can't face reality as it is. They're always there trying to justify. Something I've often laughed about is the human tendency to, they'll go so far, if they're on the spiritual path at least, as to admit that, well, people are wrong a great deal of the time. I mean, I've got my faults too. Okay, that's fine, eh? Point out one fault. Oh no, not that one. Huh? The incredible, as Master said, people are so skillful in their ignorance. How to get out of it when you can come up with so many ways to justify remaining in it. They want to get out of it, but they don't want to get out too soon. Is that it? As St. Augustine said, make me good, but not yet. How do we deal with it all? It would be a very safe thing, and this is why, although Master used to say that the greatest sin is to call yourself a sinner, what he meant was don't call yourself that and revel in the thought of it. But if you take it perfectly naturally, yes, I am, and don't wallow in that thought, then of course it's perfectly right to say it, because in fact we are. But what does it mean to be a sinner? What does it mean? It isn't a black and white thing. The devil doesn't come to you with horns and a long tail. He comes to you with a smile, and he's a con man. He knows how to make you think that, gee, this is my best friend. We have to be able to see that delusion is what it's really about, that we don't see things as they really are. And how do we get out? Let's just imagine Theseus there in the heart of his labyrinth, and deciding that it's all a delusion and where he belongs is outside. So what does he do? There's a story of a group of people from different countries who were asked to write an essay on the camel. And the American chartered a plane and flew to Arabia. No expense was no object, and examined the camel from first hand. And the Englishman, being a little bit more parsimonious, went to the local zoo, which was perfectly good. The German, being a great deal more studious, went to the library. And the Hindu sat in the middle of the floor and closed the windows and pulled down the shades and prayed for God to drop this essay in his lap. So what would... It was a Hindu who told me this story, I should say. So what would Theseus do? Would he sit there and pray to be out of the labyrinth? Would he sit there and say it's all a delusion, it doesn't exist? You can't get out of your labyrinth that way. We have a big game on our hands, and it's rather fun. Although the unfortunate consequences of playing it wrongly are something like Hayalai in the Mayan days, that if you lost, you were butchered. But anyway, apart from that minor inconvenience, apart from that slight inconvenience, you still, it is a game. And if we play it right, then we can get out of that labyrinth. But we've got to play. We can't get out of delusion by just not acting. Master used to say that you can only get out of the, you can only reach the actionless state, not by not acting, but by being intensely active for God. We have to walk, but we have to follow that slender thread to the outside. We have to act in the right way. We have to do the right things, and we cannot wish ourselves out of it. Those people who think in the name of being spiritual that they won't act anymore and they won't get involved anymore, and Yogananda met a very slovenly man in Phoenix, Arizona. He never washed. His clothes were hanging on him like tatters, and he said, "Why do you live like that?" And the man said, "I'm a renunciant." Master said, "You haven't renounced anything. You're attached to filth." You can't get out of it by just not acting, or you have to act in the right way, and it's going to take time. The fact that Theseus knew it was a labyrinth didn't mean that he could jump out either. You have to walk, and you have to walk over the whole distance that it took you to get in. And so we have to act in the right way for God if we want ever to get out of our delusion. The first thing is to understand that our senses deceive us, and that there are certain things that are, well, let's talk about, we've talked about the nature of delusion. Let's talk about the nature of true vision. This is why Master used to want us to memorize, and in fact I have the tape that I've made of that poem of his, Samadhi. He said memorize it and recite it every day, but you don't have to memorize it, you can listen to it. It's very inspiring to listen to it. And I love to meditate to that poem. The nature of cosmic vision, I don't think anybody has ever written about it as he did in that poem and in that chapter on cosmic consciousness. It's just a whole new chapter in mystical writing that he gave us. It's incredible. I know Ramakrishna would try to describe the different states of consciousness and reach a certain state where he couldn't talk anymore. And that was all he could say, nothing. But Master wrote this thing sitting on the New York subway, riding from one end of the line to the other, and gave us a piece of mystical writing that nobody has approached, nobody. No scripture has given it so beautifully. In the Bhagavad Gita, in the 11th chapter, there's a description, but it sounds rather weird. Thousands of eyes and thousands of hands and thousands of feet, and you get a little confused. You get this image of a sort of super Durga. But, I mean, she only has 10 hands, but here Krishna was coming across with thousands of them. But what Krishna was saying, of course, there was that he was in every body, and Master's description does it wonderfully. Let's think about that. That's the only reality, an infinite consciousness to which there is no end and no beginning. There isn't any such thing in that consciousness as far or near, up or down, large or small. These considerations are all a part of limitation. Even infinity, as we think of it, is something infinitely large. But you could become infinitely small just as easily. You could shrink and shrink and shrink through eternity and never reach a point where you cease to exist. It's a state of reality that is totally beyond our limited human capacity to understand, but that is what we are. We are eternal. We have lived in this body, in these bodies, for eternity. There is a saying in the Indian scriptures that if you would imagine a very large lake, and a bird that came to this lake once every 5,000 years and took one drop of water in its beak, the length of time that it would take that bird to empty the lake, assuming it didn't get emptied by evaporation or any other means, the length of time it would take that bird to empty that lake wouldn't begin to describe the length of time that it takes the soul to achieve liberation once it has come into outward manifestation. That's an incredible thought. It's a scary thought, too. But we hear it sort of popping up here and there. Buddha's explanation for why we should love everybody is that everybody in the world at one time or another has been close to us. That takes a long time for that sort of thing to happen. It's, again, a scary thought, and yet this is what you really are. You are not this little body. It's amazing the variety that God can get. You sit in a restaurant, or you just sit here and look at all the faces, and what God has been able to do with 2 eyes, a nose, a mouth. Everybody looks different, and everybody thinks this is what I am. But you aren't that. You aren't this body. You aren't this ego. You aren't this personality. You're not American or French or Swiss or Italian. You are an infinite soul that for a time is concentrated on a particular act. But that act will end, and it's not yours. It's his. He's the director. He's the dramatist. He's everything. You're just a bit actor who came out for a little song and dance, and back you go. Your part may be very important to you, but it's not all that important to the audience. And what you've got to do is somehow recognize that this reality that you are is something that has continued through a long period of time. That this little pinpoint of reality is in everything. You are like the little jets coming out of a gas burner on a stove. Each one of us is a little jet from a vast reservoir of gas that is just all the same. It's all one. It's that one energy, that one consciousness that has manifested itself through all our different bodies. And we take our lives so seriously, but they haven't anything that's serious about them. The only thing that makes man important is that he's a part of the infinite and is the infinite. As people, we don't have importance. But as the infinite, we have infinite importance. We are the sons and daughters of God. We are the children of God. We have every right to His kingdom, if we would only live in that consciousness. But we keep thinking of ourselves in this limited and very fragile role. We are infinite bliss, infinite consciousness, infinite love. And anything that tells us that we're anything less than that is a delusion, because it just isn't so. There are not two realities, a small and a large. There is only one reality. That's why that saying that the Jews have is so great, if they would only understand it in a right way. The Lord, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And He's one because He's everything, not one because He's there and all these other little gods are somewhere else. He's one because He's everywhere. As Master said, that that ordinary human love is transmuted into divine love, a love solitary because omnipresent. If we could understand this, then we should see that everything is a delusion that limits that consciousness, but we can't get out of that delusion by merely saying it's a delusion. This is what I've often observed in working with people, and I think it's the great handicap that psychiatrists work under, that you can't make a person see something just because he sees it with his mind. Often I've found, particularly with intelligent people, that they'll see everything that you're saying very clearly. They'll even laugh happily at how cleverly their delusions have been exposed. But does that get them out of their delusion? It doesn't. There's something more that's needed. Science looks at the world with the mind. Psychiatry teaches us to look at the world, or at our world, with the mind. But that doesn't get us out of our delusion. We have to get the heart into it too. That when you can see a thing with feeling, not just with analysis, that's when you've really understood it. You don't understand it as long as it's only analysis. And yet science is right that the feeling has to be, well, science is wrong in thinking that the feeling needs to be set aside, but it's right in recognizing that it's our feelings primarily that cause our delusions. Our feelings that say, oh, I like this or I don't like this, that divide everything up into a reactive process, so that you're watching a horse race and you've bet on one horse and you're saying, oh, come on, come on, come on. And your whole mind is in making something happen that may or may not happen, quite independently of what your mind is telling it. That as soon as your feelings get into the act, they are what create your total involvement in delusion. And it's perfectly true, the scientific view, that if you could just remove your feelings from the picture and see it impartially, then you would have a much clearer vision. Science has been able to explode a great many myths just by this approach to reality. But there's a level beyond which all it leaves science doing is sort of like armchair philosophers. I remember this movie that I saw years ago called Man in the Moon. It was quite a funny movie. It was put out in England. And I forget just how the particular thing I was thinking of came into being. But anyway, some scientist was saying, in protestation against somebody who was trying to cure, he said, oh, no, we're not trying to cure, we're just trying to create. We're trying to create the illness. We're trying to see what makes the illness. We're not interested in curing it. Good heavens, no. And very often, what science does is merely try to define, even to create in order that it can define more clearly. But to be useful, to be practical, is a secondary thing to the abstract scientist. Well, what we want to do is discover that level of useful understanding which will help us to grow in wisdom. Science, for example, doesn't think in terms of whether a thing is true or not. It thinks in terms of whether it works. It's so clear when you look at things that it's just practically impossible to say what's true. It's true in one context, but is it true in all? Not necessarily, very often not. But when we want to grow in wisdom, then we have to grow in the heart too. When we want to grow spiritually, we want to grow not only in cold analysis, but in love, in joy. And indeed, the scientific fact remains there too, that you can only see a thing clearly if your feelings are calm. Science tries to calm the feelings by eliminating the feelings. You can't do it because you are a feeling person. Feeling is a part of your reality. To look at the world with a nature that is capable of love, capable of joy, capable of aspiration and longing, and to say that reality is cold and meaningless is what has gotten people into the absurd bind that we're in today, where we say that there's no purpose to life, there's no meaning in life, and we think of the world as just being some sort of a mechanism. But the fact that we love, doesn't that show that love is a part of reality? The fact that we long for joy, rejoice in it when we have it, doesn't this mean that joy is a part of that abstract reality? Science has tried to suppress that which it cannot suppress if it's really seeking things the way they are. What we need to do is refine. We need to be able to bring our feelings to that point where they're so calm and where we don't react on a feeling level, but can simply accept things as they are. There is one level of humanity that has succeeded in this, only one. You might call them the spiritual scientists. People who have tried to face reality as it is, not kidding themselves, but not eliminating their capacity for feeling, expanding that capacity, looking at things with a calm love. You don't really understand people if you sit in a hotel lobby watching them like specimens in a fishbowl or in a laboratory. You can really understand people when you understand them from inside, and that's only possible with love. If you really want to understand another person, you've got to have great kindness in your heart. You can understand a certain level of him with cold dispassion, but you can't understand him really on a deep level without entering into him, becoming him, having that kind of love. Yogananda said that many times at night I will enter into another person, sometimes so deeply that I'll come out of my meditation feeling that I am that person. And he said it can be a very frightening experience. Sometimes you have to shake that delusion off. But that's how to understand people, to become them, to enter into them from inside. Now, how are you going to do that? The psychiatrist's approach, as I was saying, is not adequate. They think that by helping you to analyze and understand it only on an analytical level, that you'll get out of it. And you can indeed understand many delusions in a way, but to get out of it, you've got to act. To get out of that labyrinth, you've got to walk. You can't just sit there and analyze and finally decide, yes, it is indeed a labyrinth. Then you've got to do something about it. This is where the guru is so much more useful than a psychiatrist, because the psychiatrist is not in a position to tell you to do something. But a guru is, if you really understand. Ariadne is the guru, and that slender thread is that attunement with the guru which leads you gradually past your various delusions. I remember a very interesting experience I had several years ago. There was a saint in Calcutta, outside Calcutta, who was an advanced exponent of our path of Kriya Yoga. His guru was perhaps a disciple of Lahiri Mahashai. And so I thought, well, it would be wonderful to go and exchange things and learn things from him. There are many things that the master surely would have taught me if I knew him now. But I only knew him 3.5 years, and so I thought, well, let me go and find out. And he said that he would be glad to teach me more, but I would have to take initiation from him. And I said, well, no, I can't take initiation. I've already taken initiation from my guru. And he said, well, it's the same line after all. Lahiri Mahashai is the sort of param guru, and it's the same teaching, and it's not a matter of going against your guru. It's simply that only by initiation can I give you the teaching that will help you. And it all made perfect sense, and here was somebody who was highly advanced, and I thought, well, because my reason told me it was okay, I went ahead and did it. Do you know that from that moment I had lost attunement with Master? And I just, no matter what I did, I'd meditate, I'd do lots of kriyas, I'd do everything possible, and it just didn't come to me. Until finally, I mentally repudiated that initiation, and instantly that attunement came back. That's what I'm talking about, that slender thread. It's very subtle. It's very fine. And you can't understand it all that easily. I did something that seemed to me perfectly justified spiritually, and yet it wasn't right for me. I had my way. I had my guru. And it's in this way that you follow that slender thread. You get off into a little passage and you find the thread is tugging instead of leading. It's getting caught on a wall, and you realize, no, this isn't the right direction. And that's why Shankaracharya said that the greatest boon in all the three worlds is to have a true guru. Because just mental attunement is enough. You feel the tug in a certain direction, and if you go against that direction, you feel something happening, and it's not right. But you've got to be open to it. If you simply reject it and say, no. So many people, this is what I've found, that when they do something that they know in their own conscience is wrong, but don't want to accept that it's wrong, they'll do something else to sort of snow their conscience. The usual way is to laugh, isn't it? How do people laugh? Why do people laugh when they talk about getting drunk? You'll hear some college boy saying, "Oh, I got so drunk last night, oh." What's so funny about getting drunk, losing all your capacity for reason, behaving like a fool? Sometimes people do funny things when they're drunk, but the mere fact of getting drunk is by no means funny, and it's a pathetic thing. Why do people do it? Why do people laugh? They laugh because they want to tell themselves it was good. You hear them, why do they laugh about dirty jokes? There's nothing funny about a dirty joke. Some dirty jokes are funny. Most are not, and yet people will laugh anyway just because it's a dirty joke. Why? Because there's somewhere in their minds that they know that it isn't right. They'll laugh loudly, or you try to talk to them about something that I've seen this happen so often. If I tell somebody something that he needs to hear and he doesn't want to hear it, oh no, and they make this big noise to try to shut you up. And then what can you do but shut up? But that doesn't help them. If you find in your own mind the tendency to shout down, laugh off, or in some way snow any doubt that you have about yourself, that's the best time to say, wait a minute. Maybe that doubt's here for a reason. Otherwise, we wouldn't be making such a big noise about it. If you really were sure that it was fine, then you'd be perfectly willing to. I mean, if somebody came to you and accused you of something that hadn't ever entered your mind and you just didn't even relate to it at all, I think you would be simply, probably, unless you were extraordinarily insecure, intrigued to hear where he ever came from in coming up with this opinion, wouldn't you? If, however, he touched a raw nerve, how would you respond? That's when you, wait a minute, like this. Anytime you react in a strong way, then there's some subconscious reason for it. Anytime you don't want to face something in yourself, that's a very good time to suspect that maybe there's something in yourself that needs working. And so there are certain delusions that we have to work on. All of them are delusions for basically one reason, and that is that they take us out of our true self into that which is not true, but begins with an illusion that's been foisted upon us. There are certain delusions that we can't break out of very easily. The delusion of being human. There's nothing particularly different between being a human and a cockroach. It's all just waves of divine joy. And similarly, you think you're a man or a woman. And there are certain delusions that creep upon us, like getting old. And Various delusions, like thinking that I'm strong or I'm weak or I'm talented artistically or I've got no talent at all. If the more you can break free from those things, it's a very interesting experience. I remember sitting in a restaurant in New York once many years ago, and a woman came in with her escort, and I said to this man I was eating with, "She's from England." And he said, "Oh, don't be ridiculous. You can't tell whether a person's from England just by looking at them." And just then she turned and to her escort and she said, "Oh, where's our table?" And how can you tell? Because people assume the attitude of the place in which they are born and grow up, and they begin to think that that's the only possible way to behave. I've seen that the mouth has a lot to do with it, because the mouth is mobile. And so you adjust the expression of the mouth to the way you pronounce your words. So if you look at Texans like Ellen over there, there's always sort of a smile. You've got to have a smile to talk like that. And you look at the eyes of people and you'll see that the eyes express even more the consciousness. But you'll notice that in some places, some people, I should say, in any place that you go to, they look as if they belonged anywhere, because their consciousness is not so completely locked into being from a particular place that they don't take on those attitudes. And this is what we want to do, to pull back from those delusions that are sort of bred into us, and there are other delusions that are foisted upon us by nature itself. Like, look at the delusion of sex that comes when you reach puberty. Everybody feels affected in one way or another. It's something you can't escape. Nature puts it upon you. The delusion that comes, and it is a delusion, it may be a very pleasant one, but it's certainly something that comes upon you that nature gives you that you have no real control over. When you get a child, suddenly this great tenderness, this great need to protect, to defend, that comes upon parents that they never had until they had a child. This is a thought that's placed there by nature. And there are many, many such thoughts that are placed there by the very fact of being human. It's not so that we've just got bodies, our hormones, so many things make us what we are, and we can't get out of those things that easily, but we can begin by what we add to those things. We can get over by our own actions those limitations that feed upon the limitations that are foisted upon us. The limitations that I'm not only a man in a human body, which is a harder thought to get out of, but you begin to think that therefore it's the best thing to be, and you begin to develop a very macho kind of consciousness and see here, attitude. Or you develop a consciousness of being a woman and sort of going around simpering and being objectionably feminine. We add to whatever beginnings we have, and you'll hear Americans not merely being American, but American. And so they take whatever suggestion of self-definition is offered to them, and they'll build an iron cage around themselves with it. And we can begin by breaking down that iron cage. We can begin by working on the more obvious delusions. And at this point, merely to define isn't really sufficient. What has to be done is practice. You don't get out of it by wishing. You don't get out of it by just praying. You've got to act in those ways that will help you to overcome delusion. Right attitude is a very important part of it. Any attitude that expands your consciousness instead of limiting your consciousness. Any attitude that includes other people's welfare in your own instead of rejecting their welfare, of excluding their welfare is the word I was wishing for, of excluding their welfare from your own. Anything that affirms your separateness is delusion. Anything that affirms your oneness with everybody is walking in the direction toward wisdom. ultimately you aren't one just with people. You just are. But you've got to start with that thought that I'm one with people, that I love these people, that they're my brothers and sisters, and so on. And it's from that that you can grow into that realization that it's all the ocean and not even the waves. But to get into the awareness of the ocean, you have to recognize that you have a relationship with all those other waves too. And so to serve other people, to use your humanity in an expansive rather than a contractive way, this is good. This is the way out of the labyrinth. To act for God. So many people think that, well, they're doing all they need to do spiritually just by sitting there meditating. No, you've got to be active for God. Work for others. How many people are, in fact, Master said that it was a great mistake that wealthy people make to give all their money to their children, because it saps their willpower. And I've seen this happen again and again, that people who inherit a lot of money, it's a misfortune. It's not a good fortune. I know when I inherited my parents' money, I put it all into this house. I thought, let me use it for other people. Let me create a place. I don't have any money in savings except for a little money in Switzerland that I use to pay bills when I'm in Switzerland, when I'm in Europe. But that's all. All the other money I've got in savings is in a little tin can of quarters and dimes and things. It's a principle with me. I wouldn't want it, because what I've seen is that, well, Yogananda mentioned this. He said that he noticed so often that when that disciples who had no money would say, if only I had money, I'd give it all to your work. And yet when they got money, they gave less than ever. Because there comes that sudden thought that, I've got to protect it. The money becomes a reality to them, where before then it doesn't have reality. And so this is one of the great delusions as opposed to the minor delusions. Whether you really share that ice cream cone with someone else is a minor delusion. But the money that it takes to buy an ice cream cone is money that can be used to buy many other things too. And so instead of being limited to the thought of a car, let's say, you put a lot of energy out, you get a car, and then you've got it and it's over with. You can go on to other things. But money is an abstraction. And in the thought of getting money, you're sort of the core of it all. There's this vague thought that if I don't use the money for a car, then maybe I'll be able to use it to buy a house or go to Europe or do this thing or that thing. And it becomes a very much stronger delusion than the specific delusion of a car. Thus it is that money is one of the great delusions. The need for money, not money in itself, because money can be used for very good causes. But if you have this thought that I want money, it's an uncreative kind of energy in itself. People who are attached to money are cutting off their creativity. It's an interesting thing to look at people in different professions. I've often observed that people who are jewelers have very bright eyes. It's really interesting. They're working with bright color, beauty, maybe with a certain life that's in the stone itself, as the yogis would say. And I've noticed that people who think too much of money have dull eyes, because they're not working with a reality, they're working with a symbol of that reality. And the symbol becomes their reality, but that doesn't have anything in itself. It's just green paper. People who are out there busily thinking in terms of things that they can buy, they may have an avid look, but at least it's some... at least there's some life there. But I remember this man that I met in San Francisco, he said, I work on Montgomery Street. Of course, you know what that means. And he was a stockbroker on Montgomery Street. And there was this sort of dull look in his eyes, because it was all sort of working with symbols, not with reality. Working with this thing that once you've got, think of all the things you might be able to do. And you end up not doing them because, first of all, there's the great uncertainty as to what you might be missing, sort of like looking at the platter instead of at the plate, and the food that's on the platter. And secondly, because one body can't enjoy all those things anyway. I mean, you get 1 million acres or 2 million acres of land. What difference is it? You get 5 houses or 10. What's the difference? And so you find that it brings in a great many illusions, a great many delusions, a great many thoughts of things that have no relation to your own happiness. There's always that thought that just around the corner, if I can just buy that 3rd house or 4th yacht, I'll have it made. And people can build up in their own minds these extraordinary... I was sent in the mail recently the golden opportunity to get exact replicas of all the figurines on the 1920s cars' hoods. What a wonderful thing. But, you know, there are people, obviously, who they just can't imagine a horizon more glorious than having all of these figurines, these mastheads or mascots or whatever they call them, I don't even remember, and replicas at that. But I knew somebody who collected Rolls Royces, and it meant a great deal to him to have all these different models of Rolls Royces. He was quite poor. I don't know how he ever did it, but anyway, he got these old wrecks and fixed them up. And so we build up in our minds these ideas that lend, they say that love is blind. Remember the story of Sri Yukteswar? That he would only have that dog. It was an ugly dog, but he said attachment is blinding. It lends an imaginary halo of attraction to the object of desire. So that you will see, or a very good analogy also is Midsummer Night's Dream, where Oberon gets Puck to drop a little magic potion on the eyes of Titania, his wife, and this causes Titania to fall in love with the first object that she sees when she wakes up. Meanwhile, he takes Bottom, the weaver, and places an ass's head on his shoulders, changes his head into an ass's head, a donkey's head. And when she wakes up, she sees this donkey's head first and falls in love with it. It's so much a part of the human scene that people will fall in love with just about anything. If people will become attached to or attracted to incredible objects. And when they wake up from these things, they say, my God, whatever happened? But this is the nature of our delusion that we've got to break ourselves out of. To become calm is the essence of yoga. Yogas chitta vritti nirod. Yoga is the neutralization of, well, we could put it this way, the reactive process. That which says, I like this and I don't like that. Beauty is beauty, but you can see it as beauty much more easily if you're not attached. That's why refined people are able to see and appreciate, identify beauty in a way that unrefined people cannot. How it makes a cockroach attracted to a cockroach of the opposite sex. What makes very dull people attracted to equally dull people? I don't think that I'm out of line in saying that the more refined you become, the more you see things as they really are, and you see beauty as it really is, which is to say, essentially, a spiritual, not a physical quality. I look at some famous movie stars, men and women, and I think these people are supposed to be sex objects, sex symbols. People talk about how handsome or how beautiful they are, and I look at them and they seem ugly to me. Because what I see is qualities that are gross. Whereas I see some people who physically would not be called beautiful, and yet they are beautiful because they're kind, because they have spiritual beauty, because there is a joy in their eyes. This is true beauty. The more you can withdraw from the exaggerated response mechanism of the heart. That yogas chitta vritti nirod means literally to neutralize the vortices of feeling that draw everything to yourself. I want to own this, I want to own that, I want to repel that because it displeases me. The more you can calm your reactive process. And what is that reactive process basically? It's, physically speaking, it's the movement of energies in the spine. Yogis would say in the Irda and the Pingala. That every time there is a positive response, there's a raising of energy, a rising of energy, I should say, in the Irda. And every time there's a negative response or a withdrawing response, there's a withdrawing, a descending flow in the Pingala. And you'll notice that every time you feel happy about something, you inhale, you sit up straight, you look up. Every time you feel badly, you tend to slump, you tend to look down, you exhale. Everything has a sort of a downward feel to it. And yogis, and this is where Kriya Yoga is such a wonderful science, because it brings your consciousness into the spine and helps you to become aware of that energy flow rather than of its response in the world. You realize then that it isn't the ice cream cone you like, it's the thought that you like the ice cream that you like. You realize that it's your own inner reaction to it that makes it seem nice or unnice, and not the thing itself. One man's meat is another man's poison. The thing that seems beautiful to one could seem ugly to another, desirable to one, odious to another. And so you begin to recognize that every time you feel a positive reaction, there is this inward move, and you get control over it so that you can react positively toward anything. So that you can go into places that normally would have made you feel very uncomfortable and unhappy, and you just say, no, I'm going to enjoy it. Like when I was on Green Island in Australia, off the coast of Australia, and I was always a very poor sailor. And I had to go back because I had a lecture to give. I'd been staying on Green Island, but I had to go back this day, and when the boat was ready to leave, a storm had blown up. And it was a very heavy sea. 16 miles in this thing, and I could just see myself turning into Green Island myself. And so I said, all right, I have no choice, and so I'm going to enjoy it. And instead of thinking that it mustn't be this way, I'm going to tell myself that it should be this way. And having control over my reactive process. Every time in the past as a child when I was at sea and I'd see the prow of the ship sinking below the horizon, I would mentally try to pull it up. And every time it rose above the horizon, I'd try to push it down. And pretty soon I love that scene in The Mouse That Roared where Peter Sellers gets on this boat, walks straight across the boat and heaves over the side. This is the way This is the way I used to feel. I remember going to see somebody off at the dock in San Francisco, and the boat was still at dock, and I was getting seasick. So anyway, there I was on this ship going back to the mainland from Green Island, and it was making corkscrew motions, not just this, but this. And every time it did, I said, good, yes, yes, do it, it must. And when I got to the end, I felt fine. I must admit my willpower was slightly depleted, but I had at least been able to survive. And this is what you find, and Kriya Yoga is an extraordinary help this way, because it gives you the control over the reactive process so that you can determine how you're going to respond rather than just being batted back and forth like a shuttlecock. In a game. You get control over your own life. This is one of the most important things that you've got to do. Not allow the world to impose its delusions on you. And there's a certain part of you that you should always, no matter what ever happens to you in life, don't identify with it. Don't identify with the thought that you're a man or a woman or young or old. Yogananda used to not tell people how old he was, because he said, I'm infinity, I'm infinite, I'm eternal. And this is a very good thought. I haven't been able to do it in my life because I don't feel that much, and so I don't say it. But it's a very good thing to do, and I really don't feel my age. I don't feel that I have an age. I feel in myself, if not eternal, at least ageless. Maybe there's a subtle difference that escapes you there. I don't know. But but I feel equally comfortable with the thought of being 4 or 40 or 80. And I think we have to do this, that we shouldn't think of ourselves as men or women, Americans or Frenchmen or Italians, rich or poor. How often this delusion of money is an incredible one. How often I've seen that people, just because they have wealth, think they're wiser and more competent than anyone else. Chances are they got it from their parents, but if they got it by their own effort, it was also pure karma. One woman from Australia told me, well, getting rich is easy, there's nothing to it. Easy for her because she had the good karma. I know a man who had the ability to advise other people how to become millionaires. All the people he advised became rich, but he remained poor. Basically, I think because his karma didn't allow him. He had the knowledge, but he would always step in at the wrong moment when he was involved because his karma wasn't there. Karma plays a great deal more of a role than most people recognize. But anyway, we can't worry about something we don't know about. We have to do our best. It's the delusion, however, that people who think that just because they have more, that therefore they have more of everything, this is the worst part of the delusion of wealth, that you think that you're a better human being. This is why aristocrats have tended to treat serfs as if they were less than human. They give more honor and respect to their own dogs than they do to their serfs. And this is what makes aristocracy and the feudal system such a basically bad, pernicious system. And yet the other idea, which is so strong in America, it's a beautiful thought, but it too is a delusion. The thought that we're all equal. Are we all equal? No two thumbprints are equal. It's impossible to be equal. Nobody has the same ability in anything at all. Nobody has the same level or quality of intelligence. What we have is equality before the law, equality before God, equal rights. We have a right to have equal rights. We have a right to rise to our own natural level. We have a right to rise beyond that and to discover who we really are in God. But it certainly is not true to say that we're all equal. And how do we perpetuate this myth? Well, there's no way you can make a stupid person intelligent. There's no way you can make an incompetent person competent. And so the only way is to take the competent people and give them less opportunity. In school, to give all your energy to the dumb students and not that much to the bright students. That's a silly way to go at it, but it's the way we go at it today. There's this wish to reduce everything to a sort of a moderate middle ground where excellence is frowned upon. No, equality is only equality of right, not of fact. We have to withdraw from whatever other people say, whatever other people are. I went to Disneyland a few days ago, as I told you the other day. And I listened to that incredible, it was an incredible experience. Lincoln, they've redone it, so it's even more sophisticated in the last 3 months or so than it was before. The way he moves his hands, so it's all a robot. But Rosanna, who was with me, at first couldn't believe that it wasn't an actor. It seemed so real. He even was able to rise to his feet from a sitting position. I can't imagine how. Think of the change of balance that's required to be able to do that. All your balance is here, and yet he was able to stand up. Incredible. Maybe they had some trick for that one, but the other parts of it are just, it's really amazing. But the thing is that he talked about equality and about what makes this country great, is that for the first time in history, man has accepted that all people are equal. And it was a beautiful talk, and I must admit I was moved by it myself to feel that indeed this country does have something very important to say. And an interesting thing that Rosanna said was that the politicians in Europe wouldn't dare stand up and talk that way. They wouldn't dare justify a stand or a line of action on the basis of ideals. They'd be laughed at. There's too much cynicism there now. America has this wonderful quality that it can do a thing because it's right and beautiful. And I think that's what makes it beautiful, that we haven't lost our innocence. Some Hindu said to Master once, "Oh, these Americans, they're just children." And Master's response to that was, "Suffer little children to come unto me, for of such is the kingdom of God." That to be childlike, not to lose your sense of wonder, not to lose your sense of ideals, is a great quality, and that's what makes this country really the country of the future. I'm convinced of it, and I'm convinced of it from a level that's fairly impartial, because I was born and grew up abroad, and I've lived a great deal of my life abroad. But that sense of how wonderful it is and how beautiful it is that we do have this ideal didn't prevent me from stepping back inside and saying, yes, but it's not true anyway. It's only true up to a point, and we have to refine that. In other words, it's not enough if everybody says, "Oh, America, beautiful," and so on. There should be a part of you that steps back and not cynically says, "It's not true." But wait a minute, how is it true? You see, to judge a thing as false in a cynical way is worse even than to say that it's wonderful in a naive and gullible way. To be able to step back and just judge it for itself without allowing yourself to be swayed by what everybody's saying, this is true. And so I was listening to what Lincoln was saying in this famous speech of his, and I was saying, no, it's not enough. It's true, it's beautiful, it's wonderful to be guided by this ideal. It's wonderful to be open to the thought that all men are equal, but in what way are they equal? To be idealistic but clear-sighted, to hope for the best and at the same time not to be fooled. This is what the whole path is really all about. And the first part of it is to have that quality, and this is where Kriya Yoga helps us to get into our center, to get into this reactive process in the spine, where no matter what happens and what other people say, you don't just judge them cynically as being wrong, but you don't naively say yes, 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 because everybody's saying yes, yes, yes. You're not the kind of person who could be bowled over by a used car salesman, let's say, but you just inwardly say, well, is it or isn't it? This is where the beginning of the spiritual path is. Until you can have this quality, you can't really start on the spiritual path. You're just going to be living in that world of make-believe, living in that world of wishing things were one way or another. But that's only the beginning. We've neutralized this reactive process, then we have the upper and the lower pulls. And let's face it, they're both pulls. The pull toward enlightenment and the pull toward the familiar. We have come from many lifetimes, certainly this lifetime, from experience of the world, of being human, of being limited, of working with the senses, of working with our desires for the world, our attachments to the world. And we've got to somehow rise from that, not only by being impartial, but then after that moving. We can't, once we're centered, simply to say, all right, that's all there is to it. The Kundalini has to be raised from the base of the spine to unite. The negative pole within us has to unite with the positive pole. And this is the further aspect to what Patanjali's definition entails. The lower aspect is a wish to overcome our problems by, well, how many people would love to be children again and not have to face the real world? Be taken care of by their parents, be taken care of by their husbands, be taken care of by a trust fund, be taken care of in some way, and so you end up just sort of sleeping it all off and you don't grow. That's what I've seen with many wealthy people who inherit wealth. They don't create, they don't use their initiative. And so they become, although they themselves think of themselves as more intelligent, they become rather less capable. Many of them are not capable of handling the world of reality. To be able to be creative is necessary, but to many people the solution is not to be creative. The solution is to sink back into security. The solution is to sink back into a position of protection. And we do this in a number of ways. We all want in our soul, with our longing for soul consciousness, there's a deeper than conscious longing for love, for joy, for power, for security. All of these things are found in the soul, in God. We don't find any of them outside. But the world throws up to us these solutions. For example, drink, unconsciousness, drugs, sleep. Anything that makes you think that you can handle your problem, like this one woman whose husband died and somebody said, how's she handling it? And this friend said, oh, she's handling it beautifully. She's been taking pain-killing drugs that sort of drug the mind, and she doesn't even know what happened. This is taking it beautifully? It doesn't work that way. You don't get out of things by numbing your awareness, and yet many people do try. They try to numb their awareness through alcohol, through drugs, through escape, through building sort of protective walls around themselves and so on. All of this is delusion, because you end up still caught. It's sort of like Ramakrishna talking about the people being like fish being caught in a net. And many of them, the net is there with mud in it too, and many of the fish thinking to escape the net dig deeper into the mud. The net's on this other side of the mud. They don't get out of it that way. The only fish that escape the net are the strong ones that swim to the surface and face what's really there and then leap over the side out into the sea again. So you cannot escape your delusions or the suffering born of them by merely trying to be less conscious of them, by numbing your capabilities, by going to sleep and thinking that just by sleeping it all off it'll go away. It doesn't. You can only overcome delusion by fighting to rise above it. The delusion of security is not found by wine. The delusion of power and happiness is not found by money. And the delusion of love is not found by human love. It's not found in another person. It's found in God. And the only kind of love that we'll ever have is in Him. But there's this thought that, oh, if I just find the right person, I'll get it. And none of these things is wrong in itself. I must make it clear that just as Theseus couldn't get out of the labyrinth by just sitting there and saying it isn't a labyrinth, so you can't get out of the desire for human love by refusing to have a wife or a husband necessarily, or to get out of the desire for money by just throwing it all away. The way to get out of delusion is to use it in the right way. To use money for good. To use human love to get out of this thought that, let's say you've got a young man who's very much into sex, and he'll just sort of run like a dog after any skirt that he sees. He'll never get out of it that way. But if he can concentrate on one person and gradually refine that love for that one person until he can differentiate between love and just physical expression, if he can learn to bring that point, bring his relation to an inward point where it's an upward expression rather than a downward one, then all of this is going to get him out of it a great deal more easily than simply denying its existence. So you take what delusions you have and you use them to grow rather than simply denying them. This is the way out. But to think that any one of these things is true is denying this real aspect of your nature, which is just the soul. You are from God, and everything that you do should lead you in the direction of God consciousness. Through meditation, through service, through right action, and so on. When I was new on the path, I thought it would make an interesting book to write about specific delusions and how they work and how the mind tricks itself. I've gotten away from that because I found that understanding how the mind tricks itself doesn't stop the mind from tricking itself. And so I'm much more interested in general directions now and general things that you can do to get out of these delusions rather than merely define them. And this is where meditation and service and living for all, not for yourself, living for the welfare of others and taking what energies you have and even what delusions you have and using them to help grow from those delusions, this is the way really out of Maya.